The desert didn't speak much. It breathed in silence, in wind slipping through dry yucca, in the creak of a rusted hinge that hadn't been oiled in years. Eli Turner had lived alone out here long enough that quiet wasn't just a comfort, it was his skin. He didn't count the days. He just knew nothing had knocked on his door since the ground took his daughter, and grief hollowed out the shape of who he used to be. Until now. It started with a sound that didn't belong. Not a howl, not the rattle of a snake, not the distant thunder of hooves. Just a dull, unexpected thud against the dry dirt by his fence. He might have ignored it, might have told himself it was the wind or a branch or one of the wild dogs that sometimes roam these parts. But something, some forgotten reflex, pulled his gaze to the edge of his land. There she was, a girl no more than 16, maybe 17, Apache by the looks of her, barefoot, covered in dust and bruises and what might have once been a dress. She hadn't fainted so much as folded, like her legs had finally betrayed her and gravity had finished the job. Her arms dangled lifelessly at her sides, one hand still twitching with what little fight she had left. Blood ran in thin lines from her ankle to her heel. One side of her face had a welt the size of a man's palm. She didn't cry out, didn't plead, just lay there like a question the wind had asked and no one had answered. Eli stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other on nothing. 100 thoughts fought for space in his mind, but none louder than the one that said, "Turn around." And he almost did. He could have. No one would know. The desert didn't gossip and fences don't judge. But he didn't. His boots crunched over dry ground as he walked to her. The sun threw long shadows across the yard, stretching the moment thinner than it already was. When he reached her, he knelt slowly, not out of reverence but out of caution. She was breathing barely. Her eyes fluttered beneath cracked lids, lips dry and cracked. "Damn it," he whispered to no one. Gently, he slid his arms under her back and knees, lifting her like something fragile, like the weight of her pain might spill if he wasn't careful. She didn't flinch, just sighed, the way people do when sleep finally outruns fear. Inside, the cabin hadn't changed in years. Same single cot, same wood stove, same chair he barely used. He laid her down, tucked a worn blanket over her, and lit the lamp. Shadows scattered, revealing more than he wanted to see, rope burns on her wrists, bruises along her ribs, a cut behind her ear that hadn't clotted right. He boiled water, found the old jar of salve he hadn't touched since the fire, dipped the cloth, wiped her face. She didn't wake, but she breathed. That was enough for now. Hours passed. Outside, the world turned copper, then dark. Coyotes cried in the distance, or maybe it was just the sound of memory scraping its way up his spine. Eli didn't sleep. He sat by the door, rifle across his knees, not pointed at anything, just there, like an old habit too stubborn to break. He thought about the last time he'd carried someone. Thought about the weight of his daughter's body, limp from fever. Thought about the way the wind had sounded the day they buried her, like the whole desert had exhaled. And now this girl, dropped at his feet like an unfinished sentence. By midnight she stirred, just a twitch. Her fingers curled like she'd remembered something painful. Eli didn't move, didn't speak, just watched, not because he didn't know what to say, but because maybe, for once, silence wasn't empty. Maybe it was all he had to give. She didn't open her eyes, but if she had, she'd have seen a man not afraid of the world but exhausted by it. A man who'd stopped hoping for visitors. A man who hadn't saved anyone in a long, long time. And still, when she collapsed at his gate, he hadn't looked away. The desert didn't speak much, but that night it whispered something new, something. The night settled around the cabin like old grief, quiet, heavy, and hard to shake. Inside, Eli moved with the careful hands of someone who'd forgotten how to touch anything without it falling apart. She was still breathing. That was something. The girl hadn't stirred since he laid her down, but her chest rose and fell with the slow rhythm of survival. Not peace, just endurance. And it was that breath, barely audible over the wind outside, that started pulling things loose inside him. He brought over a bowl of warm water, a rag he'd boiled twice, and the old salve tin he hadn't opened in years. His fingers hovered above her skin for a moment, hesitating at the bruises along her ribs, the cracked skin on her palms, the faint purple ring around her wrist where the rope had bitten too deep. He'd seen wounds like that before, just not this close. Not since he blinked. Once, twice, still there. Her hands were small, too much like another pair of hands he used to hold, a memory that never aged even if he had. His daughter had been about this girl's age when fever took her in less than a week. Back then, he'd burned through every remedy he could find, every whisper of old folk cures and half-truths from traveling peddlers. None of it mattered. The girl in front of him wasn't her, but the resemblance was cruel in the way only memory could be. He cleaned the blood from the girl's face, dabbed gently at the cut on her temple, then soaked the cloth again. The water turned pink with what she'd bled. It hit him that this was the first time in years he'd touched another human being. Her breath caught once, just a hitch. Not enough to wake her, but enough to make him sit still, cloth frozen in midair. It passed, but it left behind a silence thicker than before. Eli didn't go to bed. He pulled his chair to the far corner of the room and sat where the shadows pooled. The rifle leaned beside him, not out of paranoia, just habit. He watched her from a distance, like a man studying the flicker of a candle, afraid to get too close in case the light went out. Outside, the wind whispered through the boards. Inside, only the sound of water dripping from the cloth back into the bowl, and the occasional creak of his boots shifting against old floorboards. And his thoughts. He thought of the years that stacked up behind him like cordwood. Thought of how easy it was to mistake solitude for safety. Thought about all the things he never said when it mattered, and how those unsaid things still echoed, even now. This girl hadn't asked to be saved, hadn't begged. She just arrived, broken, bleeding, and quiet, like grief had dropped her at his feet, daring him to do something different this time. As dawn crept across the floorboards, Eli noticed her eyelids flutter, a twitch at first, then a slow, reluctant lift. Her eyes met his not with fear but with something worse, acceptance, like she expected nothing, not kindness, not questions, nothing at all. She opened her mouth but no sound came, only air, only breath. And somehow that breath was louder than any scream. Eli looked away first. He stood, poured her a fresh cup of water, set it on the stool beside the bed, and stepped back. He didn't ask her name. didn't tell her his. Just nodded once, slow and tired, and said the first words he'd spoken aloud in almost 2 days. "You're safe, for now." She blinked and breathed. The morning sun burned low and slow, as if reluctant to rise over a land that had long forgotten justice. Eli was chopping wood behind the cabin when he heard hooves. Not one, not two, a group. The kind of measured rhythm that said they weren't in a hurry because they didn't expect resistance. He stepped around the side of the house just as 3 riders came into view, dust trailing them like shadows. The one in front wore a clean coat, too clean for the desert, and a pistol that sat easy on his hip like it had been there all his life. The 2 flanking him didn't bother with smiles. Eli said nothing. The leader drew his horse to a stop just outside the gate. Didn't dismount. Didn't need to. "Morning," the man said, tipping his hat like he was about to offer fresh-baked bread instead of bad news. "I believe you've got something that don't belong to you." Eli's eyes didn't blink. "She's inside, barely breathing. Don't seem like she belongs to anybody right now." The man chuckled. "You'd be surprised what the law allows these days. Got the papers right here." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, held it up with 2 fingers like a dealer showing a winning hand. "Certified by the county judge," he added. "Girls like her orphans, runaways, they're part of the work program now. Indentured until they're 21. Property in a manner of speaking." He unfolded the paper slowly, as if Eli could read the ink from 20 feet away. There was a red stamp near the bottom, bold, official, soulless. "She came from Whispering Ravine," he continued. "Got out somehow. Ain't supposed to be your concern." Eli didn't move. Didn't reach for his rifle, though it leaned against the door frame just behind him. Instead, he nodded once toward the house. "She's got rope burns on her wrists, bruises on her ribs. She ain't said 2 words since she got here, but the way she sleeps, it's like she thinks the ground's gonna hit her again." He stepped closer to the fence, voice still low, almost tired. "I see blood," he said. "I don't see consent." The man on the horse shifted in his saddle, eyes narrowing just a bit. "You a judge now?" "No, just someone who knows what wrong looks like." A long silence stretched between them, taut like wire. The kind that could snap or hold, depending on the next breath. The man folded the document and slid it back into his coat. "We'll be back." Eli didn't answer. He watched them ride off, the dust curling behind them like smoke from a slow fire. When they were gone, he turned and leaned against the post, hand brushing the splintered wood. The girl hadn't come to the window. Maybe she was still asleep. Maybe she'd learned it was safer not to look. But Eli was looking now, not at the law, not at the paper, at the truth, written not in ink but in the marks left on someone's skin. And in that moment, with the sun catching on the barbed wire and the taste of dust in his mouth, he chose. Not because he was brave, not because he had a plan, but because he was done pretending he couldn't see. It was just past dawn when she opened her eyes again. No panic, no flinch. Just that same tired stillness, as if waking up didn't surprise her anymore. Eli was pouring coffee over the stove when he noticed. He didn't say a word. Just slid a mug her way, then stepped back to his usual corner of silence. She didn't drink. Instead, she studied the room, her eyes tracing the walls, the lone cot, the window cracked with dust. Then she looked at him. Not with fear, not quite with trust, just recognition, like he was another kind of ghost and she'd seen a few before. "My name's Sahil," she said, her voice frayed at the edges. Eli nodded. Let the name settle in the room like dust in the morning sun. "They're still there," she continued, almost to herself. 12 of us, maybe more now, whispering ravine. Her voice cracked on the name, but she didn't stop. "They keep them underground, cages, barred doors. No one hears a thing out there, just the wind and the walls. They said the townsfolk don't ask questions, said girls like us don't matter." Eli's jaw tensed, but he stayed quiet. He'd learned long ago that silence had its place, especially when someone else was pulling pain out of their throat one syllable at a time. "There's a girl," she added, "Juana, my cousin. She's 14. That's when her voice shook, the armor slipping just for a second. "They won't let her go, not unless someone trades something, and no one's coming." She looked away then, eyes fixed on the water stain spreading across the ceiling. Eli thought of his daughter again. She'd been 15 when she died. The fever took her fast, but it had left its mark slower, crueler, like time itself was teaching him how helpless a man could be. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry. Just stood, walked to the far end of the room, and pulled up the trapdoor near the fireplace. The wood groaned under his boots. From beneath the floor he retrieved a long crate, wrapped in oilcloth and memory. He set it on the table, peeled back the covering. Inside was a revolver, cleaned but aged, and a worn leather holster that still bore the shape of its former owner. A small pouch of bullets lay beside it, untouched in years. Sahil didn't say anything. She just watched. Eli stared at the weapon for a long time. Then slowly, almost reverently, he picked it up. His fingers curled around the grip with a familiarity that scared him more than he'd admit. It didn't feel like power. It felt like grief rediscovered. He strapped on the holster without a word, then walked out onto the porch. The wind greeted him like an old adversary. He didn't make speeches, didn't declare war. Just stood there looking out across the dry, cracked land stretching toward the west. Behind him, Sahil's voice came soft through the doorway. "If you go, they'll come for you." Eli didn't turn around. "They already are," he said. He stepped off the porch. There were no speeches that morning, no whispered promises, no fire in the sky, just the sound of Eli's boots crossing the dirt yard, slow and certain, like footsteps carved into time itself. He didn't tell Sahil he was leaving. He didn't need to. She sat in the doorway, legs tucked under a threadbare quilt, the old dog curled at her feet like a tired sentinel. The cabin behind her looked smaller now, as if it had exhaled. As if it, too, understood that something had shifted, quietly but irreversibly. Eli walked past the woodpile, past the cracked water barrel, toward the rusted iron shoe nailed to the post. Once that horseshoe had marked a home where no trouble crossed uninvited. A symbol, a boundary, not just of land but of decency. He hadn't touched it in years. Now he reached up and flipped it downward. It made no sound, but it rang through him like a bell. He saddled the old mare without a word, checked the rifle, loaded the revolver, tightened the cinch strap one last time. There was no urgency to his movements, only precision. Not the kind born of duty, but the kind born from the clarity of a man who's done running from what he knows. Sahil didn't speak, but he felt her eyes on his back. It wasn't worry exactly, more like recognition. The kind of knowing that passes between people who have been burned and kept walking anyway. Before he mounted, he glanced over his shoulder. You stay inside. The dog'll bark before anything else gets close. She nodded, said nothing. Then, almost as an afterthought, he reached into the saddlebag and pulled out a small tin of jerky, tossed it to her like a peace offering from a world too old for kindness. And with that, he rode. He didn't head west toward the ravine. Not yet. He turned south toward the only man he'd once trusted with the truth. The desert stretched on both sides, flat and open like the inside of an empty church. A place where the wind carried more prayers than answers. Eli wasn't praying, but his thoughts had taken the shape of one. He remembered the last time he'd seen Crow, not in uniform, not giving orders, just sitting at a funeral, staring at the same patch of dirt where a 12-year-old girl had just been buried. Eli's daughter. Crow hadn't said a word back then, but when the crowd thinned and the sun dipped, he'd stayed, sat next to Eli in the dust until the moon came up. Sometimes that's all justice was, staying, not walking away. Now, with every mile, Eli wondered if the silence between them was still the same kind, or if time had stripped Crow of that quiet strength and left only retreat. But he had to try. Because what waited at Whispering Ravine wasn't just about Sahil. It wasn't even about Wana. It was about a sickness that wore paper masks and official stamps. That stole names and replaced them with numbers. That taught girls to whisper and men to forget. And Eli, he'd done enough forgetting. When the Crow Ranch came into view, the sun was low enough to cast shadows long and crooked across the fence posts. It looked like any other piece of land. No flag, no symbol, just stubborn soil and a man guarding it with whatever pride he hadn't spent. Eli didn't announce himself. Just rode up slow, the way you do when you're not asking for help, you're just offering a choice. Crow stepped out before Eli could dismount. He hadn't aged so much as settled. Like stone gets smoother, not weaker. Didn't expect you, he said. Eli got off the horse and looked him in the eye. I've seen things I can't let go, he said, and I need someone who hasn't let go either. Crow studied him. Not like a man weighing lies, but like one remembering the truth in pieces. Eli added, I'm not here for a badge, just a line. A single damn line between right and wrong that someone still believes in. Crow didn't blink. Then he said, You sure it's still there? Eli paused, then nodded. If it ain't, we draw it again. For a moment, neither moved. Two men standing on the edge of something that might have been justice, or just another long ride into regret. But Eli wasn't chasing redemption. He was making room for it, not with noise, not with glory, just with choice. Crow turned, opened the door behind him. Leave the horse, she'll need the rest, he said. We ride out before dawn. And just like that, two men walked into a quiet house. No one cheered. No one saw. But somewhere out there a girl sat on a porch with a dog and a quilt, waiting for the... They rode through the dark like shadows that refused to vanish. No lanterns. No talk. just hoofbeats against packed earth and the slow pull of something heavier than fear, something closer to reckoning. The moon hung low, a thin slit of white cutting through the black sky like a blade that had already drawn blood. Whispering Ravine wasn't on any map. It didn't need to be. Places like that live in whispers, not ink. Crow led the way, one hand near his rifle, the other resting easy against the saddle horn. Eli followed, eyes narrowed, shoulders tight. He didn't ask how Crow knew the path. Some things men just learn when they stop pretending justice always comes with a courtroom. By the time they reached the ridgeline, the wind had died. Below, the ravine breathed with unnatural life. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't silent either. There were voices, laughter, the clink of bottles, and somewhere beneath it all, the faint drag of chains against stone, metal rubbing against cruelty. A single lamp swung at the mouth of the cave, casting long, shifting shadows across the canyon walls, like the place itself was alive and watching. They dismounted just short of the edge, crawled the last yards to a rocky overlook. What they saw wasn't a camp. It was something worse, organized, clean, cold, 3 tents, one wagon, a makeshift corral for horses, and a cage, not bars, not wood, but stone and lock built into the ravine wall like it had always been there. Inside, figures, too small, too still. Crow cursed under his breath. Eli said nothing. His hand drifted to the revolver on his hip, not to ready it, but to remind himself it was there. Not that he needed reminding. He'd already loaded it that morning. Beside him, Sahel pressed herself into the dirt. She hadn't wanted to come, but she'd insisted. She knew the names, the faces, the shifts, the lies they told to survive. And now, lying flat in the dark, she began to whisper them. One in the corner, that's Luma. She won't speak, not since the fire. The girl with the braid is Keta. She pretends she's mute so they don't pick her. That's Wana, my cousin. The smallest one, if they move her again. She didn't finish. Each name landed like a stone in Eli's chest. He couldn't see their faces clearly, but he didn't need to. The way they huddled, the way they flinched at footsteps, it was enough. A man stepped out of one tent carrying a ledger. He looked clean, too clean. His hat was new, his boots polished. He called out something about head counts and rotations. Another voice answered from within the cage, bitter, mocking. Then the laughter again. It didn't belong to boys. It belonged to men who thought no one was coming. Eli stood slowly. Crow grabbed his sleeve. Not yet. I wasn't asking, Eli said. He moved like a man with no weight left to carry. Down the slope toward the lamp. He wasn't quiet, but he wasn't loud either, just steady, measured. Each step the echo of a promise he'd made without words the moment Sahel had asked him, "Will you let me die?" He said nothing. Because no was something you showed, not said. The first guard didn't even raise his rifle. He saw Eli and laughed, maybe thought it was a drunk, a lost man, a story to tell later. The shot was clean. A single crack that split the stillness like lightning split sky. The man dropped before he understood. The second didn't get a shot off. Crow's bullet found him just as he reached for his belt. The camp exploded into chaos, screams, boots pounding, a lantern knocked to the ground. Fire licked up the edge of a canvas tent. One of the girls screamed. Another didn't. She just ran for the bars and gripped them like salvation had shape. Eli didn't blink. He moved straight for the ledger man, who held his hands high, voice trembling with legal jargon and county seals. And I was just hired, too. Eli didn't shoot, but Crow did, just once. Through the ledger, paper fluttered. Silence returned. Sahil reached the cage first. She didn't have a key, but she had something sharper. Eli tossed her his knife. The lock was stubborn, but the girls inside were already moving, ready, like they'd rehearsed freedom in their heads every night for years. When the bars fell, they didn't cheer. They just ran, quiet as ghosts. Names disappeared into the night, names that had once been whispers, now returned. The fire from the collapsed tent still glowed behind them, casting broken silhouettes against the stone walls of the ravine. Smoke curled like questions no one wanted to answer. Most of the men had scattered, those still breathing at least. But one figure stood tall amid the flickering chaos, arms folded, hat tilted low, as if the whole mess amused him. Callahan. He didn't flinch when Crow stepped into the light. No rifle in hand, no finger on a trigger. Just the silver badge that had long since lost its shine but never its meaning, pinned flat against a dusted coat. Crow didn't say a word at first. He just walked forward, slow and deliberate, the kind of walk that wasn't about threat. It was about refusal. Refusal to be part of the silence anymore. Callahan grinned. Well, hell, didn't think ghosts still carried metal. Crow stopped a few feet away. Didn't blink, didn't move. Just let the weight of that old badge hang between them like a stone in midair. I thought they retired you, Callahan said. Guess the county still sends corpses when it's out of bullets. Behind Crow, Eli emerged from the shadows. No pretense, no sneaking. The girls were gone now, safe in the ravine's upper trail, led away by Sahil's sharp voice and steadier hands. The night didn't belong to Callahan anymore. But no one had told him that yet. I've read your laws, Callahan said. I've signed your papers. You're late to the funeral, Marshal. Crow's voice was soft, but it didn't bend. We've lost plenty, he said, but not this one. Callahan laughed then, sharp, loud, almost convincing. His hand inched toward his belt. You really think one badge and a broken cowboy can? He didn't finish. The crack of Eli's revolver cut clean through his sentence. No warning. No pause. Callahan dropped before he even knew where the shot had come from. Crow didn't look surprised. Just stepped forward, nudged the man's shoulder with his boot, then looked back at Eli, who stood with his arm still half raised, smoke trailing from the barrel. The remaining men didn't wait. They scattered like dry grass in a gust, boots pounding into the black edges of the canyon. Silence returned, this time like a breath finally exhaled. Crow walked to the fallen ledger, picked it up, and tossed it into the fire. The pages hissed, then curled into ash. No one reached to save it. Eli holstered his gun, not like a man proud, but like a man who understood that some choices don't get applause. Crow looked at the night sky, then said, We'll have to lie, you know. Eli nodded, so long as it's not about who deserved it. They didn't speak again, not that night. It didn't happen all at once. The girls came out in fragments, one by one, not in a flood, but in a tremble. Their feet touched the ground like they weren't sure it would hold them. Some shielded their faces from the moonlight as if even freedom might burn. Others walked as if their legs didn't know what motion was anymore. No one shouted. No one cheered. The quiet was deeper now, but not hollow. Sahil stood at the mouth of the ravine, eyes darting, hands clenched at her sides. Every face that passed, she watched with the weight of someone counting the living in a dream. Then, Wana. The girl stepped from the shadows, smaller than memory allowed, her braid undone, a tier of fabric tied around one wrist. She didn't run, just walked until she was close enough to be real. Sahil didn't speak. She just pulled her in, wrapped both arms around her cousin and held tight. No sobs, no collapse, just breath, long, ragged, real. A kind of breathing that only comes when the body stops bracing for the next blow. Eli didn't move. He stood a few paces away, arms loose at his sides, the dust on his boots thick as ash. He watched the embrace without stepping in, not from distance but from understanding. This wasn't about him, never had been. He didn't need to be the one they thanked. He didn't need to be the center. He just needed to know that tonight had meant something. Crow emerged from the shadows beside him. They exchanged no words, just a look, the kind that says, "This is the part you don't get medals for, but it's the only part worth staying alive to witness." By morning, the fire had died out. The tents were gone, trampled and smoldering. The cage stood open, its door twisted. Eli and Crow returned with picks and shovels, not to bury bodies, but to bury the place itself. Stone by stone, they collapsed the entry to the cave. Not a fast job, not a clean one, but thorough, final. Sahil helped. So did two of the older girls. They didn't ask why. They didn't need to. When the last rock fell into place, the ravine no longer looked like a wound. It looked like the earth had decided to close it. Eli. A month passed, not like a blaze, but like wind through dry grass, quiet, slow, certain. No one in the town spoke openly about what happened in the ravine. There were no articles, no trials, no names written down. But people changed. The sheriff started locking the front door of the jail at night, not because of fear, but because he finally felt the job meant something again. The schoolteacher asked for more books about native languages. And the man who used to sell contracts from the back of the saloon vanished, leaving only dust and unpaid debts behind. Wana, who had flinched at every sound when she first arrived, now spent her mornings at the gas station. The old man there never had a family, taught her how to count coins, make change, fix a flat tire. She never said thank you. She didn't need to, she just kept showing up. Sahil didn't leave either. She found work at the border church, not preaching but teaching. Letters, numbers, stories. The other orphans, mostly girls from places no one remembered, began to write their names in chalk. Names they weren't ashamed to say out loud anymore. She still walked past Eli's cabin every Friday. Sometimes she stopped to feed the dog. Sometimes she didn't. But she always looked toward the porch, where a pair of boots rested under the chair, weathered, still, reliable. Eli didn't talk much more than before, but something in him had softened, not cracked. He started tending the old plot behind the house, where the dirt was richer, where the wind didn't bite as hard. It had once held a single grave. Now flowers circled it, not perfect rows, just wild colors spreading like memory made gentle. It wasn't grief anymore. It was gratitude for second chances, for voices that refused to stay quiet, for the fact that sometimes the world does tilt back toward the good, if only slightly. One morning a new sign went up at the edge of town. No ceremony, no town hall vote, just nails, wood, and a brushstroke of certainty. It read, "No girls for sale," and underneath, smaller but clear, "Not here, not anymore." No one knew who made it. No one needed to, because it was the kind of afternoon that made you forget it ever rained. The sky stretched wide and pale, all bone and light, with no promise of water. Eli sat on the bench outside the feed store, hat low, boots coated in dry dust. He wasn't waiting for anything. Not anymore. Some days he just sat because it felt honest. A stranger leaned on the post nearby, young and clean-shaven, with the scent of fresh ink and newspaper still clinging to his collar. He looked nervous, like a man who didn't yet know how to be small in a quiet town. "You're Eli Turner, right?" he asked. Eli didn't answer, just sipped slow from a cup that hadn't held coffee in over an hour. "They said you were involved back in the canyon, Whispering Ravine. Said there were bodies, said you never testified." Eli looked up then, not sharp, just steady. "I heard you were charged," the young man pressed, fumbling with his notepad. "That some said it was murder, others called it justice." Eli took a long moment before speaking. "I lost a daughter once," he said. "She died in silence. After that I learned how to live quiet." The reporter blinked. "But they—" Eli cut him off, voice low but firm. "Words don't always fix what's broken." He stood then, slow but not weak, nodded once toward the edge of town, where a thin line of trees had begun to green again, soft at the tips. "Sometimes silence is the only thing that keeps you from lying." Later that week it rained. Not much. Just a slow, steady drizzle that fell for maybe an hour, the first in months. Sahil was the one who noticed it first, standing near the edge of the creek, where the dust had cracked deep enough to swallow a boot. She crouched and touched the water with 2 fingers, watched the ripples fold out and disappear into the earth. Juana ran barefoot through the shallow puddles. The dog barked and chased her. Nearby, a handful of other girls, once caged, now messy-haired and laughing, held out their hands to the sky as if trying to catch something that had always slipped through. Eli stood a ways off, arms crossed, watching the water curl between rocks. Sahil looked back at him. "Thought you said it wouldn't come," she said, smiling without force. He shook his head. "Didn't say that, just said it takes its time." She sat down beside the creek, fingers still trailing the current. "People think healing's a flood," she said. "Loud, sudden, makes everything clean." Eli knelt, touched